It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Gary Lineker's 30-year career at the BBC comes to an early end following a row over one of his social media posts. He has apologised for the hurt and upset caused. The presenter had shared a post illustrated with a rat, which has been used to represent Jewish people in anti-Semitic propaganda, including Nazi Germany. He deleted the post as soon as he became aware of the emoji.
I'm sorry, unreservedly, for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent.
We'll discuss if having a social conscience forced Gary Lineker off the BBC or whether becoming increasingly vocal politically was just too problematic. Plus, friends reunited, or are we just dancing to Europe's tune? The PM thinks everyone's a winner, but some, including UK fishermen, think we've been sold down the river. So Keir Starmer says a new deal for the UK with the EU is a common-sense reset. But is it really a new beginning for old allies or a Brexit betrayal? Breaking the taboo, I'll hear from former MP Theo Clark telling her story in her campaign to secure better maternity care for women who experience birth trauma. Plus, please don't stop the music. One of the country's last pub pianists hoping to strike a sympathetic chord before landlords call time on their profession. All that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. Well, first tonight we're going to take you live to Washington. This is the scene in the Rose Garden at the White House. Any moment now, we are expecting to see President Trump. You can see people assembling there in the Rose Garden, taking their seats. He's due to be signing legislation that will ban the non-consensual online publication of sexually explicit images and videos that are both authentic and computer-generated. That's what he's going to be announcing there. But it is going to be the first time we are seeing the president since he spoke earlier today to Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky about achieving a ceasefire in the war in Ukraine. As I said, crowds assembling there in the Rose Garden, taking their seats before the president is due to come out and head there to the podium. We'll return live to Washington as soon as that gets underway. Now, he's been the face of Match of the Day for a quarter of a century, and he's been the BBC's highest paid star. However, today, Gary Lineker confirmed that he is leaving the corporation and will no longer present its World Cup coverage next year. Lineker's departure came with an unreserved apology for sharing a social media post illustrated with a rat, which has been used to represent Jewish people in anti-Semitic propaganda, including Nazi Germany. Well, Lineker said he deleted the post as soon as he learned about the rat's symbolism, adding he'd never knowingly share anything anti-Semitic. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has this report.
Did he jump before being pushed? Gary Lineker less vocal in public than online. Sharing an anti-Semitic trope on Instagram caused his premature BBC departure, and that was the platform to announce it.
Last week, I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never, ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like, once again, to say I'm sorry, unreservedly, for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent.
This was the understated sign-off from Saturday's FA Cup final.
For now, goodbye.
The final goodbye will be on Sunday. It was always intended to be his last match of the day, but now he won't be staying to present the FA Cup and World Cup next season as planned. Ultimately, Gary Lineker didn't want to be constrained by the impartiality rules the BBC staff here have to abide by. On Gaza, he claims silence equated to complicity. But even he accepted he crossed the line with a post he insisted wasn't knowingly anti-Semitic, but was deleted. The apology wasn't enough to save him, ending his 3 decades on the BBC in scandal rather than celebration. The BBC's Director General, Tim Davies, said, Gary has acknowledged the mistake he made. Accordingly, we have agreed he will step back from further presenting after this season. We want to thank him for the contribution he has made. The BBC turned the former England captain into an accomplished broadcaster and the face of football, handed the prime Premier League highlight slot in 1999 and eventually the BBC's biggest salary. But finding his voice politically in public became increasingly problematic and a lightning rod for the BBC's critics. They tried to rein him in, comparing the then Tory government's migration policies to the rhetoric of 1930s Germany led to a suspension. Solidarity from colleagues produced this unprecedented programme 2 years ago with no other voices. But the BBC climbed down. Lineker was allowed back and allowed to say as he pleased elsewhere. But the boundaries of acceptable commentary on the Israel-Hamas conflict were stretched to the limit. And for one of Lineker's former bosses, this isn't about denying him a social conscience, but offence that damages the BBC.
Of course, people can have the right to speak out, but you are representing all the licence fee payers who pay your salary. And it's very hard in those cases to take strongly political positions in which you are essentially disagreeing with half the people who support your salary. So that's why I think the BBC has to be impartial.
After being a fixture of football coverage, a television era is ending. Gary Lineker has a flourishing podcasting empire to focus on. Even freer to speak out beyond football. It won't be the BBC's problem anymore.
Well, you saw some of Gary Lineker's statement in Rob's report there. We can take a listen now to what he had to say in full in his post on Instagram.
Hi everyone, some personal news. Last week I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like once again to say I'm sorry unreservedly for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent. I know that. I've stood up for minorities and humanitarian issues and against all forms of racism all of my life, including, of course, anti-Semitism, which I absolutely abhor. There's no place for it and never should be. So I think it's best for all concerned that I step down from BBC presenting duties altogether and not do next season's FA Cup or World Cup. The final day of the Premier League season on Sunday will be my last show. It's been a pleasure and a huge privilege working with the BBC for 30 years, especially hosting Match of the Day, a programme that is so close to my heart and an integral part of my life. I'd like to thank all of the quite brilliant, talented and lovely people, both in front and behind the camera, that I've worked alongside for 3 decades. You're at absolute best. The relationship with the BBC has been long and wonderful, but it's the right time for the organisation and myself to go our separate ways. Thank you also to all of you for your incredible support and love over so many years. It means the world to me. I'll see you all on Sunday.
Well, it really is the end of an era. Sports correspondent Rob Harris is at the BBC's new broadcasting house, which is in central London. And what's happened here with Gary Lineker, Rob, has raised so many questions. Where do you want to start?
Well, really, it is quite a landmark day. One of the BBC's most high-profile presenters brought down in controversy. Gary Lineker being the frontman of football for so many decades across the corporation, leaving not completely on his own terms. And there is some criticism that the BBC is facing. Danny Cohen, a former director of television, saying he shouldn't even been allowed to present this Sunday's final Match of the Day, questioning why the statement from the BBC doesn't mention anti-Semitism directly. And within the corporation, there will be some disquiet. The BBC's director of sport did reference in his statement to staff today that it had been an emotional and difficult week for them. There will be some who found his interventions on political matters deeply problematic while they were trying to uphold the BBC's values of impartiality, and so often they became a lightning rod for the BBC's critics. Others will have welcomed Gary Lineker using his platform, unlike many perhaps who've been in sport, for political matters rather than staying perhaps bland and neutral. But It's how far he took some of these posts and the content he shared, quite often from fringe groups, taking things very partially out of context at times, very much to press home his point, but to draw attention, as he saw it, to the unfolding humanitarian issues in Gaza. But you saw particularly from the Israeli side questions about why he didn't draw attention to the Israeli suffering since October the 7th, notably, and the hostages that were taken by Hamas. And more broadly, I suppose it's quite unusual to be discussing a sports presenter in this context. And we've been here very often over the years discussing Gary Lineker, not for anything to do with his on-air contributions in terms of football, but for his political interventions, including when he was taken off air. And we have seen a very different Gary Lineker in the last decade, becoming this activist, particularly after the Brexit referendum, campaigning for Britain to stay in the EU. Well, he hasn't quite had the complete freedom to do so, and many said that the BBC should have reined him in much sooner. Well, he now has his podcasting world to be able to address many of these matters on, and his Rest Is Football podcast will remain on BBC Sounds until the end of the year, although there will be no payoff, despite the fact the BBC are severing ties with him prematurely. But this is an end of a television era. Gary Lineker, the face of football for decades, will no longer be on the BBC presenting football.
Rob, you mentioned there Gary Lineker, successful podcast company, on podcasts himself. He is not a man who's short of a few options at this later stage of his career. We also know what the future of Match of the Day is, has 3 new presenters for next season. But in terms of talking about Gary Lineker as an outlier when it comes to on-screen talent at the BBC, in terms of sort of saying what he wanted on social media, which, as you referred to there, didn't go down well in some quarters at the BBC. Has this tightened up restrictions on BBC talent now? Like I said, he's the outlier. Is the BBC very clear about, you know, what can and cannot be said going forward on social media?
But generally, the BBC staff should not be posting any political opinions. Gary Lineker, though, was a freelancer. He saw himself separate from the news division. He was involved in no news output at all, so believed he had that freedom to be able to express his views. Although, to some quite unusually, a month or so ago, he did give an interview to the BBC, which he was given prime-time coverage, where he critiqued the BBC's Middle East coverage. So a sports presenter on the BBC discussing how they're covering global affairs, which perhaps might have raised some eyebrows from those on the ground in places like the Middle East reporting on these matters. But it just shows how things have transformed in decades gone by. If a BBC presenter was to express their political views, they'd have to write a newspaper column or something. Now, having social media, of course, you can provide these views all day long. But, you know, it has been quite a transformation from Gary Lineker. In his footballing career, Mr. Nice Guy he was known as, never booked, never sent off, playing for Barcelona, Tottenham and England, quite mild-mannered, reinvented himself as a broadcaster, and now becoming this figure that we're very often talking about more politically than about football matters.
Rob, thank you. Rob Harris outside BBC's new broadcasting house for us this evening. Now, the Home Secretary says that she wants to toughen up the UK's anti-terrorism laws to better protect national security. Yvette Cooper says the country is facing a surge in threats from state-sponsored actors, including Iran. Let's bring in our Home editor, Jason Farrell, who is here and can tell us more. Jason.
Yeah, well, the context of this is this kind of tangible growing threat. There's been 20 Iranian plots that have apparently been stifled by MI5 since 2022. There's also been a 5-fold increase in police investigations into state-sponsored terrorism. And there were 3 Iranians, of course, imprisoned under the Securities Act. In court under the Securities Act, who are facing charges. So these new powers are designed to basically create a list of organisations that work for other states that are considered to be need to come under similar laws to those of the terrorism laws. So in other words, creating kind of like a prescribed list for intelligence services, and in particular intelligence services that look to recruit what they've described as criminals, proxy groups, misfits and private investigators. And what that does is basically it says that it will become a criminal offence to be associated with these groups, to try to invite support for these groups, even to display the insignia or flags in public of these groups. Now, Jonathan Hall QC, who has written the report, which was commissioned by the Home Secretary in May, has been speaking to the Policy Exchange think tank, and here's what he had to say.
States often use proxies to carry out sabotage or cognitive warfare or assassination. This may be because their intelligence officers have been expelled or prevented from entering the UK. Partly it's because states quickly adapt to what works. So the Foxtrot network is a recently sanctioned organised crime group which frequently employs, would you believe it, teenagers for attacks and carries out deadly work on behalf of Iran. Partly because the internet offers a perfect way of directly recruiting and tasking and paying individuals. This adds to the convergence effect. Young people who might once have been attracted to a terrorist cause are now willing to carry out sabotage for Putin's Russia. They are recruited in exactly the same way by groups operating on, for example, Telegram.
Well, we'll just interrupt that story. Jason, thank you. We're going to go to the Rose Garden now. President Donald Trump arriving there with his wife, the First Lady, Melania Trump. Donald Trump signing legislation today that will ban the non-consensual online publication of sexually explicit images and videos that are both authentic and computer-generated. That's what he's announcing today. It's also the first time we've seen him since he's spoken to Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Let's listen in.
I join you here today for the signing of the Take It Down Act, a national victory that will help parents and families protect children from online exploitation. This legislation is a powerful step forward in our efforts to ensure that every American, especially young people, can feel better protected from their image or identity being abused through non-consensual or intimate imagery of I and CII. Artificial intelligence and social media are the digital candy for the next generation. Sweet, addictive, and engineered to have an impact on the cognitive development of our children. But unlike sugar, these new technologies can be weaponized, shape beliefs, and sadly affect emotions and even be deadly. Over the past few months, I have met with brave survivors, deeply loving families, and caring advocates who know firsthand the emotional and psychological toll of NCII and deepfake abuse. Alison Berry stood boldly for change, despite the risk posed to her and her family by speaking out and making her voice heard. Alison, your voice and the voices of so many like you made this bill a national priority. Many thanks to members of Congress, both parties, for passing this legislation, including Speaker Johnson, Senator Cruz, Senator Klobuchar, Congresswoman Salazar, Congresswoman Dean, and Congressman Guthrie, and so many more. Thank you all for coming together to prioritize people over politics. As First Lady, my Be Best initiative is focused on improving children's well-being, encouraging kindness, and creating a safer online environment for our youth. Today, I'm proud to say that the values of Be Best will be reflected in the law of the land. I want to thank my husband, President Trump, for standing with us on this effort. His signature on this new law is not where our work ends on this issue. Now we look to the Federal Trade Commission and the private sector to do their part. Today, through the Take It Down Act, we affirm that the well-being of our children is central to our future, of our families and America. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the President. Thank you.
Want to sit down?
Yeah.
Send the gentleman. Nobody knew that. Great job. That was a great job. Well, I want to thank everybody. We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed. So hopefully we did something. We also spoke to the heads of most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up. What a shame that it ever started in the first place. So, but I want to thank Melania and for your leadership in this very important issue. It's an amazing issue. America is blessed to have such a dedicated and compassionate First Lady. I would tell you she is very dedicated. In fact, if you look at just what I heard, Putin just said they respect your wife a lot. I said, what about me? No, they like Melania better. That wasn't good. I don't know if that was good. I'm okay with it. I'm okay. I also want to congratulate the First Lady in securing $25 million in the first fiscal year, 2026, budget to provide housing and support for youth transitioning out of the foster care. And I can say that she loves children, and you really worked very hard on this, and you had a lot of help from some friends of mine right here, and a lot of the senators are here and congressmen, and I appreciate you all being here. We're also grateful to be joined by people that are just in love with what we're doing. It's such an important situation, and commissioners of the Federal Trade Commission and the CEO of X, Linda Yaccarino. Where are you, Linda? Where are you, Linda? Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Stand up. Thank you, Linda. Great job. You're doing a great job. It's a big deal, right? That's great. Today, it's my honor to officially sign the Take It Down Act into law. It's a big thing, very important, so horrible what takes place. This will be the first ever federal law to combat the distribution of explicit, imaginary, posted without subject's consent. They take horrible pictures, and I guess sometimes even make up the pictures, and they post it without consent or anything else. And very importantly, this includes for forgeries generated by artificial intelligence known as deepfakes. We've all heard about deepfakes. I have them all the time, but nobody does anything. I asked Pam, can you help me, Pam? She says, no, I'm too busy doing other things. Don't worry, you'll survive. But a lot of people don't survive. That's true, and so horrible. With the rise of AI image generation, countless women have been harassed with deepfakes and other explicit images distributed against their will. This is the wrong, and it's just so horribly wrong. And it's a very abusive situation, like in some cases people have never seen before. And today we're making it totally illegal. Thank you. Upon hearing the stories of so many women affected, our First Lady made stopping these abuses a top priority, and she was given tremendous support because she'd go up to people and talk about it. They say, yeah, we know about it. We have the problem. Can we do something? And she did something about it with the help of a lot of the people, especially the political people sitting here today. Among Melania's guests in the gallery during my address to the joint session of Congress was a 15-year-old young person, Elliston Berry, whose image was turned into an illicit deepfake by a peer. Elliston, where are you? Are you around? Stand up, darling. That's fine. Beautiful. It's great. Thank you. You look fantastic. Elliston quickly became a powerful advocate committed to preventing other girls from suffering the same abuse. Elliston, we salute you and we thank you very much, and it's an honor to have you with us today. Great job you've done. Also with us are several other brave Americans whose lives were rocked by online harassment, including Francesca Manny, as well as a South Carolina State Representative, Brandon Guffey, and his family, who have lost their son to suicide after he was targeted in an internet extortion scam, of which you have a lot of them, a lot. I want to thank you both for your incredible work and to reach this important day. Could you stand up, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. Great job. I've read about it. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to have you here, because there's no place like the White House, I found out. You know, you have a lot of places, and I just left some of the richest places, and we loved them, and they gave us a nice contribution of about $5 trillion, but this is a special place. Even they talk about it, so it's great to have everybody here. Under the law, I will sign in just a moment. Anyone who intentionally distributes explicit images without the subject's consent will face up to 3 years in prison. In addition, this law establishes new civil liabilities for online platforms that refuse to take these images down promptly upon request. We will not tolerate online sexual exploitation, and especially it's gone on at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It's getting worse and worse, and I think this is going to hopefully stop it. And not easy to do. People talked about all sorts of First Amendment, Second Amendment. They talked about any amendment they could make up, and we got it through because of some very brave people, including some very brave politicians in the audience. I want to thank the bill's sponsor, Senator Ted Cruz. Ted, stand up, please. Great. Great. Thank you, Ted. It's great. Very effective person. And Congresswoman Maria Salazar, friend of mine. Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for their amazing work. And thanks also to the 99 senators and 408 members of Congress who voted in favor of the bill. Wow, I wish we could get that vote from other things. We have another bill coming up. Do you think we'll get that vote? Maybe not. We should, but we probably won't. But working with our First Lady, we've shown that bipartisanship is still possible. That's true. With 99 senators, that's incredible. Senators, stand up. Look at that. John, you're here. Look at all of the senators. This is big stuff. I'm in trouble because I don't have your names. They didn't give me these names. We have so many. We have half of the Senate here. Now they're all going to hate me because I can't introduce you. We don't have the time for that. I have to get back to Putin and people. But thank you very much for being here, all of you, and congressmen, a lot of them, and women. Working with our First Lady, though, we've shown that bipartisanship is possible. I mean, it's the first time I've seen such a level of bipartisanship, and it's a beautiful thing to do. I'm not even sure you realize, honey, you know, a lot of the Democrats and Republicans don't get along so well. You've made them get along, and she didn't even know about that. She didn't know we had a problem. She didn't know we had a problem. She got a... But I want to thank you, honey. You've done amazing that this was done when you started. And I said, I don't know, it sounds like a tough one, and yet a very important one, and you got it done. So I congratulate you, and I congratulate Ted, Maria, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, and we'll sign the bill. Thank you. A long time, huh? Come on around. That's beautiful. Come on around. Hey, look at that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I thought you were getting the bill. Thank you. You did it. We're out of our got it. Thank you.
Thanks. Your leadership made this happen, so thank you.
I know. Thanks, Maria. That's fantastic. Okay, you ready? Okay, honey, are you signing something? Do you want to sign it anyway? Come on, sign it anyway. She deserves to sign it. Okay, there we have it.
There we are.
That's a big one. Thank you very much, everyone. And you have some pens here. You most importantly, right? Grab one of them. Oh, look at these white pens. I've never seen that before. I want one of them. I've never seen it. Here, Pamela, take that. Take that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Just
Thank
grab
you
it.
so much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. You go ahead.
Mr. President, let me introduce you to Brandon, who lost his son, Gavin.
Let me get up.
He's a state legislator in South Carolina. He's been incredibly brave, and his whole family. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump overseeing that bill, signing the legislation that will ban the non-consensual online publication of sexually explicit images and videos, both authentic and computer-generated. The president announcing a prison term of 3 years for individuals and liabilities for online platforms. Let's bring in our US correspondent, James Matthews, who is at the White House. So that bill being signed, this is something that Melania Trump has been championing. It's been signed into law within the last few minutes. But the backdrop, of course, to all of this is phone calls between the president and Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin about a potential ceasefire in Ukraine. He didn't hang around to answer any questions on that, did he? Which we thought he might.
Yeah, because there are many questions to be asked and indeed answered, Sarah-Jane. Just a fleeting mention of the good phone call, constructive as he would have it, with Vladimir Putin. That's what he said in his effective readout, this posting on Truth Social. But, you know, there are questions about America's stance today on the back of that call and Trump's take on the call. Because on Truth Social, his upsum was that both sides, Ukraine and Russia, would now be the negotiators. It would be up to them to negotiate a path forward towards peace, an end to the war as he would have it, which begs the question, and it would have been the first question to be asked of Donald Trump, well, is this United States now walking away? A United States that has been steward-in-chief of the process to work towards peace, a United States that's cozied up to Vladimir Putin, has presented a plan that leaned heavily towards Moscow, that threatened sanctions against Moscow. Are you now saying, Mr. President, that you're taking a step back and it's up to Ukraine and Russia on their own? Because I can tell you, in Kyiv, that won't tickle them. Indeed, President Zelensky, he has posted in the past half hour or so, talking about if these talks got to the stage where it was difficult, and I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, they reached a kind of dead end, would the United States be involved once more, and would that lead to sanctions? He says he doesn't yet have an answer to that question. So I think in Kyiv and in other allied European capitals, they are wondering now, where do they stand vis-à-vis the United States and its involvement in the Ukraine-Russia conflict? Because it sounds very much like they stand alone.
James, thank you. James Matthews there with the latest from Washington. More to follow at 9 o'clock in the world. Now, my next guest is no stranger to taking a stand. As a Conservative MP, Theo Clark made an emotional speech in the Commons back in 2023 about the trauma she experienced while giving birth. Theo suffered severe blood loss and needed emergency surgery following a 40-hour labour to deliver her daughter, Arabella. Well, since leaving Parliament, Theo has continued her campaign for better maternity care in England and Wales, and she has now written a book entitled Breaking the Taboo, Why We Need to Talk About Birth Trauma. We'll speak to Thea in just a moment, but first let's take a listen to that speech that she gave in the Commons about her own experience.
This is the first time I've ever spoken about this in Parliament, and it's probably the most personal speech I will ever give as an MP. Last year, I had a very traumatic birth at my local hospital in Staffordshire. I had expected to have that first hour with my beautiful daughter and had imagined her magically crawling up my chest to start breastfeeding. Instead, after a difficult 40 hours of labour, I began bleeding very heavily after delivery. I was separated from my baby and rushed into the emergency room for surgery. I remember the trolley bumping into the walls and the medical staff taking me into theatre and being slid onto the operating table. I spent over 2 hours awake without a general anaesthetic, and I could hear them talking about me, and obviously it was not looking good. It was the most terrifying experience of my life.
Well, Theo is here with me now on the UK Tonight, surrounded by women and mums there reaching out to console you. It really was moving for everybody watching and you, and a lot has happened since then because that speech went viral and you were speaking so openly about your own experience. And that's where your campaign started, because through that speech you saw and heard about the scale of the problem. It wasn't just you.
Well, I thought, firstly, very long and hard about whether I should speak about something so incredibly personal in Parliament. But I hoped that by me breaking the taboo, by speaking about my traumatic birth as then an MP, it would help other mothers to feel less alone. But what I hadn't expected was the huge number of mothers that wrote to me after my speech went viral. And I had literally thousands of mothers across the country writing to me with very similar experiences, ranging from birth injuries to baby loss to issues with mental health and PTSD. And interestingly, not just mothers, but also fathers too, who'd witnessed very traumatic births. And that really set me on the path to being a campaigner on improving maternity care. And my book is published very specifically 1 year on from the birth trauma inquiry, which I published last year in the House of Commons. And I'm really calling on the government to implement those recommendations 1 year on, as yet more families have come forward with very shocking testimony, which I've included many in the book.
We'll get onto that in just a moment, because a year since those recommendations, and you could argue that very little has changed in that time. I mean, the statistics back up the anecdotal evidence you were hearing from mothers and their partners. As I said, you weren't alone in your experience, far from it. Research you conducted showed 1 in 3 women found aspects of their birth traumatic. You were at the extreme end of the scale. What happened to you? It's really hard to hear. You can only imagine what it was like to go through. But can you give me an idea of the levels of birth trauma? Because some women don't want to speak about it because it's always the attitude of, oh, well, I didn't have it that bad.
I think that's so true. I mean, I was so struck by the stigma and the shame that seems to be attached to women who've had very difficult births not talking about it. And when I was reading the over 1,300 families that sent in their stories to me last year, I was very struck that it was not just recent births in the last few months and weeks, but also mothers who'd given birth 10, 20 years ago, who said that they just felt such shame that they couldn't speak about it.
And stop them from having more children in so many cases.
I mean, I did a survey with the All-Party Parliamentary Group on birth trauma, and nearly 76% of mothers said they wouldn't have another baby because they'd suffered from a traumatic birth. And I hear that time and time again on my podcast, Breaking the Taboo, where we basically hear from mothers to say that they had such a difficult experience. And I think they're kind of sent home with the baby and told, well, you've got an alive baby, you'll be fine. And actually what I've heard is that mothers have gone on roughly about 30,000 every year to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And we discovered with our report that there was a postcode lottery in maternity care. And that's what I found really shocking. I didn't feel it was appropriate that depending on where you give birth in the UK, you will actually receive a different level of care in this country, particularly on things like mental health. They're not offered in every single part of the UK. And that's what I've been campaigning for, is to end that postcode lottery, because I don't think it's acceptable. And I think the government needs to take action now to address it.
Yeah. The CQC, in its annual report last year, found maternity services have been in steady decline since 2019. That's despite repeated NHS promises to change following a series of high-profile maternity scandals. It said that women are being left alone on wards during and after birth and not being treated with basic compassion or kindness by doctors and midwives amid ongoing staffing shortages. So many reports. We know about the Donna Ockington review. I've interviewed Donna Ockington looking into the scandals across the country. Your cross-party parliamentary committee, came up with a report and a series of recommendations. That was a year ago. In that time, what's happened?
So there have been a number of small changes which the NHS and the government have brought in. So things like the pelvic health physios, which I asked for to be rolled out across the UK, has happened. They have taken action on things like birth injuries and training in hospitals. But what I find concerning is that our headline recommendation, which was announced and agreed by the previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has not been adopted formally by the new government.
Remind us what that was.
Yeah, so it was the National Maternity Improvement Strategy, and we asked to therefore have a standardised level of maternity care. And I find that quite shocking because, Prime Minister stood up in the chamber of the House of Commons in response to my question at Prime Minister's Questions and announced that this was happening. And since that time, I've received even more stories from families with very shocking testimony. I've included many of them in my book to really illustrate the point that we need to take action. And I'm very much calling on the Health Secretary now to implement that recommendation. It was a cross-party inquiry. We had support from across all political parties to do it. And I don't understand 1 year on why the government hasn't made a similar commitment.
You're not in Parliament now, so you may be able to speak more freely. Just looking at that speech, the comment was made at the time. It wasn't a full chamber. A lot of the women who had supported you privately came into the chamber to support you, women and mothers. There were a few men in there, but not many. And a lot of people made the parallel with the fact that there has been such underinvestment in women's healthcare in general. And it's largely been ignored. As you said, this has been going on for decades. And very little, small improvements have been made, not the big changes that will save lives in many cases and protect mothers.
I think that's so true. I mean, we know that women's health has traditionally been rather ignored in terms of policy. And I personally think that that's partly a reflection of the demographic of Parliament. I mean, I was very unusual to have a baby as a sitting MP. I was only the 56th female MP in history to actually have a newborn baby whilst being an elected representative. And I think, I did raise maternity care in the Chamber of the House and became a big campaigner on it. And I think there are major ramifications for our democracy if we don't make Parliament as well more family-friendly, to allow mothers with very young children to be representing you in Parliament. And I've written about in my book to make that point that we mustn't just be modernising the NHS, but Parliament as well, because it has serious implications for our democracy.
Yeah. What was your experience in the world of work? Because obviously, as you said, you made the decision to make a very public speech in Parliament about your experience, because from what you've said, in the build-up to that, your birth trauma affected your, well, not just your family life, your personal well-being, but also your work life as well. You were deselected and nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. It wasn't until you confided in a few female colleagues that people got an understanding of what you went through. And this is happening to women regardless of what job they're in. This is happening across the country.
Well, first of all, I think it's very difficult for anyone, including myself, to talk about birth trauma. A lot of the symptoms I was exhibiting with very severe birth injury. Because remember, I'd been in, labour for 40 hours. I'd been rushed into the emergency theatre, had very heavy blood loss and suffered a major birth injury at the time. Not that I knew what that was when I was in the operating theatre. And I think mothers do feel that they can't talk about this stuff. But I was also surprised by the level of support that I did have. And I think there were a number of things that were done for me, like having me a proxy vote so I could represent constituents. But it was also very clear, you're absolutely right, that Parliament was actually not set up for young women with very small children, because there are a number of things that I couldn't do. So during the pandemic, we were allowed to have remote questions where I could dial in on a television screen into the chamber of the House and ask questions of ministers. And I felt, that I was really letting my constituents down by not being able to represent them in important debates on things like HS2 in the chamber. And I found it astonishing that we had all of that technology brought in during COVID-19, but it's not eligible to be used for sitting MPs like myself with, very significant health challenges or with a newborn baby. So I think they really need to look at making Parliament more family-friendly, because I don't currently think it's fit for purpose in the 21st century.
Well, Thea, your campaign continues. Your book is out now. A final thought from you this evening, because, you know, women are starting to talk about birth trauma. Of course, it's a very private experience, and for some people it helps to talk and tell their stories and remind others that they're not alone. But it's a conversation that needs to continue if there's to be any change, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I hopefully broke the ultimate taboo by speaking about something so incredibly private and personal in Parliament. But I hope by me very publicly sharing my story, it allows other women to feel less alone and that they can tell their employer that they're not ready to go back after their maternity leave has ended, that they can talk to friends and family. And I just find it devastating to read stories of, you know, mothers who haven't even told their partners the extent of their injuries that they had in childbirth. So I think we need to have a really frank and national conversation about this. It does have serious implications for mothers going back to work and the economy, also mums being able to look after their babies and all the support that they need. So I really hope that the government takes action to implement our recommendations and to make sure that mothers are being listened to and given the care that they need postnatally.
Well, Thea, thank you for speaking up for so many mothers across England and Wales who have been through this. Breaking the taboo, why we need to talk about birth trauma is available now. Really good to talk to you. Thank you, Thea.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the programme tonight, do you fancy 2 pints of lager and the racket of hits? We'll be meeting the pub pianist who can play more than 4,000 tunes on demand. You won't want to miss that. And coming up in the sports, as Brighton battle back after Liverpool took an early lead in the Monday night football. We'll have all the details.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board.
So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board.
This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Still to come, warm up those vocal cords because we're going to have a sing-along with a pub pianist. Get your requests in while you can. He knows over 4,000 songs, apparently. We'll test his knowledge. That's on the way. Teddy's here with the sport. Any requests? There's some great songs that are played before the big football matches, aren't they? I'm thinking like the Crystal Palace.
3 lines on a shirt as well.
3 lines on a shirt. I bet he'll know that one. That's too easy. Apparently he plays I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles.
Oh, that's nice,
yeah.
Come on Eileen was always a good pub
OK,
one,
I'll
wasn't
put
it?
that down as your request, shall I?
That's my nan's name as well, yeah.
I love that. I love that. I wonder what Pep would choose. Pep Guardiola, whose Manchester City side, of course, lost the league, lost the Champions League and lost in Saturday's FA Cup final against Crystal Palace. But according to him, they have won silverware this season. Do explain. I like this looking on the bright side of things.
Before all this happened then, Pep Guardiola, the start of the season, Manchester City beat Manchester United on penalties in the Community Shield, which
seems
generally,
like so long ago now.
generally in this country isn't really sort of seen as one of the main trophies. As you say, Newcastle won the Carabao Cup, Crystal Palace beat them in the FA Cup, Liverpool romped to the Premier League title. I'll tell you about their game in just a second. They are playing tonight. But Pep has said that they're actually in the bracket with those teams that have won a trophy as they try and qualify for the Champions League. So it's quite interesting. He says that obviously Newcastle have done that. They're trying to compete for a Champions League place, trying to finish in the top 5 in the Premier League this season, and also says that Liverpool are there, but Manchester City are alongside them with the Community Shield. It's interesting overseas managers, though, because Jose Mourinho always used to count the Community Shield as one as well. So maybe it's a culturally...
You always think, why play it if it doesn't count? Do you know what I mean? Why belittle it?
Well, it's before this, for people who maybe aren't familiar with this, it's before the start of the season. It's traditionally the FA Cup winners, Manchester United, last season against City.
It's like the season opener, isn't it?
And everyone's not quite up to speed, they're not quite fit, they may play different teams. There's a sort of celebratory atmosphere. But Pep definitely counting it as one of his trophies. And I suppose it means that, unlike his first season, 2016 to 17, they have got a trophy this season. But I think the big thing is, SJ, Bournemouth tomorrow, Fulham on the final day on Sunday. They need to qualify for next season's Champions League. It's been a very difficult campaign, because if they don't, suddenly it looks a lot worse, doesn't it? Even next season will be difficult.
Yeah, well, ahead of those matches, he should take the Community Shield into the dressing room.
I'm sure he's got a few photos, remind them of the good old days last summer. There we have it then. That's a picture with Manchester City. As we say, part of the reason they've had a difficult season is that Liverpool have romped to the title, and they are playing tonight against Brighton. Update you on that in just a second.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Dowling's idea about coaches is an interesting one. 42% of Premier League first-team coaches across the last 6 seasons have been English. 56% have been British. The Premier League are also committed to coach development, launching an elite coaching plan in 2020 with a clear philosophy: better coaches lead to better players. Through that, they've supported 480 coaches and coach developers over the last 5 years. Alongside that, there's the Professional Coaching Partnership, bringing together the Premier League, FA, EFL, League Managers Association and others to offer further support for coaches. The League Managers Association, which represents managers in our top 4 divisions, told us they run a significant number of qualifications and personal development services for English coaches, all of which are oversubscribed, they say. But they admit that the football industry in this country is competitive, volatile and short-term. They say increased foreign ownership of English clubs and the purchasing power of English football mean clubs can scour the globe, and that has narrowed opportunities for home-developed coaches. The LMA say that whilst all the football authorities are committed to improving the situation, it's the clubs who need to do more. They need to recognise the rich seam of talent they have on their doorstep and provide environments that allow domestic coaching to develop and flourish. One of the long-standing complaints by aspiring coaches in this country surrounds the FA courses. Too expensive, not enough places, too much prevalence given to former players. So what exactly are the qualifications that you need? Beginners start on the Introduction to Coaching Football. Around 28,000 people do this a year at a cost of £100. Next is the UEFA C licence. Between 5,500 and 6,000 places are available. That one costs £650. 750 places are available on the UEFA B licence. This costs £1,200. You can manage in League 1 and League 2 with this qualification. The UEFA A licence costs climb to £4,000. 120 places are available on that course, and Championship managers require that particular badge. And the highest qualification is the UEFA Pro licence. You need that to manage in the Premier League. UEFA set the number of places available at just 24 a
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, if you head down to your local pub, the chances are there'll be a big screen TV showing the footy, maybe a jukebox or the odd bit of karaoke. But the chances are you won't find a pub pianist like Trev Wooderson playing punters' requests. Trev is one of a dying breed and says that he has memorised an astounding 4,300 tunes that he can play at the drop of a hat or a quick request. Let's speak to Trev now. Trev, the piano man, who always starts with the West Ham anthem, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles. Trev, you've been doing this for decades. What's the most popular request?
Right, well, it depends what pub you're in, but there's a number of them. I mean, for instance, the other night, We'll Meet Again was really, really popular when I did a gig down at the Bourne Dragon at Meath, just outside Hatherley. And but different pubs have different customers and they make different requests. So there's never anything predictable like that. It depends on the clientele, depends on the customers. I mean, sometimes if you get a lot of, a lot of women in their 30s and their 40s, they might want ABBA, for instance. So I do a lot of ABBA in that case. So it depends on the clientele. I'm ready no matter what.
Well, listen, you're one of a dying breed. There's only a handful of pub pianists left in the country. You're trying to encourage people to take up this gig because it sounds like a great gig, touring the pubs. And, people might not have heard of a pub pianist because it is quite an old-fashioned profession. But when you come in, I mean, the Gen Z, they're into Taylor Swift. My producer, Holly, said that's what I'd ask to play. Can you play any Taylor Swift?
Well, Taylor Swift, a lot of it's not even 30 years old yet. And don't forget, the pub pianist plays standards. So my repertoire, I'll be honest with you, it doesn't include Taylor Swift. It includes music from the 1820s to the early 1990s.
What's the oldest song, then, you could play?
Well, I'll kick off with the old West Ham anthem, if you like. I always do this at the start of every gig that I play. We've got a great team, West Ham, and all the support they can get their hands on. Something like this.
I mean, Trevor, we can't actually hear it, which is interesting. But I'm going to have to descend into singing I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles. But I know that you start with I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles and you always end with Land of Hope and Glory.
That's right, you do.
That's one for last orders, isn't it, for the bell to be rung?
Yeah, there's a fella called Dick Brodie up in London. Absolutely magnificent guy, phenomenal. And you think my memory's a lot with 4,003, 4,400. He had 11,500. And this guy was phenomenal. And he taught me the ticks. And he said, kick off with a good local
I'm going to try again, see if the comms is any better. Could you play us out with a bit of Land of Hope and Glory?
Of course, no problem.
It's live TV. I'll see you tomorrow at 8.